The physician's hands were trembling. I saw her fix her gaze on my file rather than the black and white flickering of my baby's heartbeat on the ultrasound screen. No, her gaze was fixed on the documents, namely on my husband's name, which was neatly written at the top of the page. Then in the middle of the exam she abruptly shut off the monitor, as if someone had cut out my life. "Mrs. Mercer," she uttered in a barely audible whisper, "I need to speak with you privately right now." After showing me to her office, she shut and locked the door. I believed there was a problem with the infant. I could hear my heart hammering in my ears. I was having trouble breathing. I was unable to think. Then she said something that completely destroyed my world. "Before you get home today, you must leave your husband. First, choose a divorce attorney." I chuckled. I actually chuckled aloud. "What? Why? Together we are expecting a child. We're content." "I don't get it." "That's precisely the issue." She had a paper-white face. "Everything you believe to be true about your marriage will be altered by what I'm going to show you. However, you must understand how I ended up in that office 4 months pregnant, so let me begin from the beginning. The man who slept next to me every night told lies that formed the foundation of my entire life. Daphne Wilson is my name. My age is 32. I am the director of marketing for a Connecticut boutique. And I'm from what's referred to be old money. 5 years ago, my grandmother Eleanor passed away. She gave me the historic Wilson family house, where 5 generations of women had lived, loved, and reared their children, along with around $2.3 million in a trust. I never showed it off. I put a lot of effort into my own career. Every morning, I went to the same coffee shop and drove a 10-year-old Subaru. It was security, not identity, that was inherited. However, it turned me into a target. Simply put, I was unaware of it. 4 years ago, at my family's yearly charity dinner, I got to know Grant Mercer. It had been hosted by the Wilson family for many years. That year, within 3 minutes of meeting me, a man had asked me about my financial condition, and I was standing at the bar attempting to get away from him. Subtle, huh? Then Grant showed up. Easy smile, tall, dark hair. "What was I drinking?" he asked. Joked about the awful jazz band. Didn't even bring up money. He said he was merely a financial advisor who had received a last-minute invitation from a coworker. He claimed to be unaware of the identity of the Wilson family. In retrospect, that ought to have been my first warning sign. A financial advisor who fails to investigate the host family of a significant charity event. That would be equivalent to a chef declaring, "Oh, we're making food today," when they arrive at a culinary competition. Didn't know. However, I had had enough of blatant gold diggers. Instead of asking about my bank account, this nice man inquired about my favorite novels. We spent a year dating. Grant was perceptive, observant, and able to recall even the slightest details. I could have purchased the restaurant, but he insisted on covering the cost of dinners. He appeared very sincere. Vivian, my mother, saw right through him. She pulled me aside following their initial encounter. "The man's eyes are not reached by his smile. Daphne, there's a problem with him," she said. "I sense it." I informed her that she was being jealous, too protective, and paranoid. We were always fighting over Grant. After a while, we simply stopped communicating. The woman who raised me and I were virtually silent for 2 years, exchanging just birthday texts. All as a result of my decision to trust my husband more than my mother. Mom was correct, spoiler alert. She has been waiting patiently to say, "I told you so." She's definitely earned it by now. After a year of dating, Grant and I were married. My grandmother's estate hosted a lovely ceremony. As he vowed to love and protect me forever, he broke down in tears. In retrospect, those were likely the most sincere tears he ever shed. Not with happiness but with relief. At last his long game was paying off. We saw a fertility doctor after attempting to conceive naturally for 2 years. The diagnosis came like a truck. Grant was very infertile due to male factors. He hardly had any sperm, and what he did have hardly moved. It was practically impossible to conceive naturally. Grant looked heartbroken. He sobbed for 20 minutes in the car. He often expressed regret as if it were his own shortcoming. I reassured him that we would work things out together. That was the purpose of marriage. I was unaware that Grant wasn't shedding tears of sorrow. His plan had suddenly become much more complicated, which was why he was crying. He wasn't grieving. He was only recalculating. We chose in vitro fertilization (IVF), using ICSI, a specialized process in which a single sperm is injected directly into an egg. Our best opportunity. Grant was adamant about doing his own study on clinics. He claimed to have found the ideal one, completed all of the documentation. I was so emotionally spent at the moment that I assumed he was being encouraging. The first cycle was catastrophically unsuccessful. For 3 days I was unable to leave my bed. Grant embraced me, encouraged me in a whisper, and said we will try again. 7 months ago, the second cycle was successful. Pregnancy test results are positive. Everything was altered by 2 pink lines. I shed joyful tears. Grant embraced me tightly, immediately discussing baby names, nursery colors, and the future he had always imagined. Then he casually stated, "Now that we're a family, I should update my will." It struck me as kind and sensible, the kind of thing a decent husband would consider. I was unaware that he was already claiming my grandmother's money as his own. Everything appeared to be ideal. The life I had imagined since I was a young child playing with dolls in my grandmother's garden. The devoted husband, the unborn child. I had no notion that documents that would destroy my ideal existence would be shown to me by a stranger with shaking hands in just 3 months. And I was unaware that the man who slept with me every night had started the fire. Before we go any further, if you are enjoying this story, please hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is. I read each and every comment, and it means the world to me. Let's get back to the story. I was 4 months pregnant, and my marriage had changed. Initially, it's small things that you notice but ignore since the alternative is too unpleasant to think about. Grant began to place his phone face down on all surfaces. I was unaware of the new password. Before I could raise any questions, he would go outside to answer calls, return, and explain it was work-related. During these late-night calls around 11 p.m. on a Saturday, he said he was reorganizing customer portfolios. I'm not an expert in finance, but I believe the stock market is off on weekends. Unless Grant had secret customers in Tokyo, which he most certainly did not. There was more going on. The number of late nights spent at work increased. 3 times a week, occasionally 4. It would be midnight when he returned home. He is not an ER surgeon. He is a financial advisor. What could possibly need a timetable like that? I discovered receipts. I had never been to a restaurant downtown. Dinner for 2 costs $280. 40 minutes away from our home is a hotel in the city. Why would my spouse require a hotel room so near his house? Grant had all the answers when I asked. Easy, well-practiced responses that came a bit too fast. Important networking, client dinner. The hotel was used for a late-night meeting. Additionally, it made more sense to stay over rather than make the tired trek home. Additionally, his tone shifted when I persisted and requested more information. You're being paranoid, Daphne. The hormones are to blame. I was cautioned against this by my mother. Pregnant women become crazy. Avoid becoming one of those wives. I was embarrassed to even inquire. He was really skilled at this. I had to apologize to him for asking questions. Around the same time, the financial strain increased. Grant's requests about money became more frequent. More urgent, more creative. I should be added to your trust. What would happen if something went wrong during delivery? I must have access to money for the infant. It's simply useful. It makes sense to have a power of attorney. Every married couple engages in this behavior. Your grandmother's house is too large for us. Unless you don't believe me, we ought to sell it. Make wise investments with the funds. I am fully aware of the finances that would optimize our profits. The man requested that I sell my grandmother's house, so he could use the money for investments. This is the same guy who claimed that because he couldn't recall which streaming service carried his shows, we needed 3 distinct ones. I should entrust $2 million to that person. Not at all. Grant's warmth vanished as I deliberately and softly answered no. He grew aloof and icy, claiming that I moved too much now that I was pregnant. He began to sleep on the far side of the bed. The disputes increased in frequency. He would mention the trust, which I would decline. For days he would ignore me. The duration of his silent treatments was precisely till he became hungry. It's funny how that worked. It seems that his ideals had a deadline, and that deadline was an empty stomach. He hardly touched me anymore. He claimed he didn't want to harm the infant. Blame my changing body. On the surface, it sounded compassionate. In my bones, it felt like rejection. I made an effort to discuss it with him. He said that I was being hormonal, needy, and challenging. I began to question whether I was the issue. Grant wasn't in bed when I woke up around 2 in the morning one night. I discovered him in the kitchen, bent over his phone, whispering something. I listened while standing in the corridor. He said, "It's almost time. Everything will be resolved by spring." I only had to wait till he noticed me before hanging up. "Work emergency," he stated. "Honey, go back to sleep." I didn't inquire as to who had work-related emergencies around 2 a.m. regarding the resolution of issues by spring. I couldn't believe my marriage was still working because I was too exhausted, too pregnant, and too desperate. The next week, Tara, my best friend, stopped by for lunch. Sitting across from me at the kitchen table, she observed me making excuses for Grant's stress, work pressure, and transition to fatherhood. At last, she set down her fork and met my gaze with those eyes that had known me since college. "Listen to yourself, Daff. How recently did you speak with your mother?" I didn't respond. "When was the last time Grant was genuinely pleased to witness your unhappy performance? Not performing for other people. Truly delighted to see you in the building." I was also unable to respond to that. "Trust your instincts," Tara said. "There's a problem here." I told her she was being overly dramatic, but I was unable to go asleep that night. Grant's phone, usually facing down, his late evenings, and his apparent fixation on gaining access to my money were all on my mind. Sometimes, when he thought I wasn't paying attention, he would look at me as if I were a maths problem rather than a person to love. A routine OB appointment for an ultrasound at 4 months pregnant. I was booked with Dr. Claire Brennan, a colleague, while my regular physician was on vacation. I went by myself. Grant was unable to miss a customer meeting. Nothing special, just a regular appointment. With cold gel on my stomach, I reclined on the test table, anticipating my baby's usual dancing on the screen. Dr. Brennan was courteous and competent. While setting up the equipment, she struck up a conversation asking me how I was feeling, whether the baby was moving much, and all the standard inquiries. Her expression altered as she opened my file and looked at the documents. She glanced at my husband's name, then back at me. I noticed that her hands began to shake. She put the ultrasound wand down, reached over, and shut off the monitor entirely. "Mrs. Mercer," she uttered in a barely audible whisper. "I have to talk to you in private right now. I believe there was a problem with the infant." In only 3 seconds, every worst-case scenario raced through my head. After escorting me to her office and locking the door behind us, she uttered words that completely upended my world. "I know what your husband did, and I have proof." She reached into her desk drawer and took out a folder. She opened it, her hands still trembling. She said, "My younger sister works at your fertility clinic. She came to me in tears 3 weeks ago. She filled me in on everything. I instantly recognized your husband's name when I saw it on your file just now." Dr. Brennan inhaled deeply. "I'm terribly sorry, Mrs. Mercer. However, you must see this before you leave for home, before he finds out. Everything I believed to be true about my marriage, my pregnancy, and the guy I loved vanished before my eyes when she spread the folder out on her desk between us. Molly, the younger sister of Dr. Claire Brennan, was employed as a nurse at the fertility clinic, the same facility that my husband had meticulously investigated for our IVF procedure and thought was ideal for us. I could now see why he had been so picky about that decision. Everything was explained by Claire. Her hands weren't steady, but her voice was. Molly had arrived at Claire's flat near midnight 3 weeks prior. She was crying so much that she was having trouble speaking. She hadn't slept. She had shed pounds. She was finally unable to bear the guilt that had been consuming her for months. Molly informed her that a patient's spouse had come up to her at the clinic 7 months prior. He was attractive, well-groomed, and appeared reasonable despite his desperation. He claimed to have a unique circumstance that called for prudence. He clarified that his wife was unaware that he was utilizing donor sperm for their IVF procedure. He didn't want to burden her with a genetic problem in the family. Nothing ominous. All he needed was assistance in keeping it quiet. He would be willing to pay for the help. $30,000 for a nurse who earns $52,000 annually. but is drowning in credit card debt and student loans. It was hard to say no. Molly assisted in switching the samples. Sperm from a paid donor was used in place of Grant's sperm, which could not have conceived otherwise. The embryologist was also involved. Grant had come to him on his own with an additional payment. The transition was not noticed by either of them. Molly was reassured by the embryologist. The husband is an expert in his field. Married couples' arrangements are none of our business, but it helped Molly, particularly when she saw that the pregnancy was successful in the clinic records. A woman was carrying what she thought was her husband's child somewhere out there. And it wasn't. She was destroyed by the guilt. She was unable to see herself in the mirror. She frequently called in sick. At work, she began experiencing panic attacks. She eventually broke 3 weeks ago. She filled Claire in on everything. As I sat in that appointment, I heard Dr. Brennan describe how my husband had used $50,000 to set me up for infidelity. $50,000. That exceeds the total amount he spent on our honeymoon and wedding. I suppose I finally realized what his true priorities had always been. There was more, even though they weren't the open bar. Much more. Claire outlined the entire plan. The strategy for more than a year Grant had been constructing piece by piece. The first phase was already finished. Bribe the employees of the clinic. Change the samples of sperm. Ensure that no one speaks. Additionally, phase 2 was finished. Await a healthy pregnancy. Act like a loving, eager soon-to-be father. Create the ideal image. After the baby was born, phase 3 was scheduled. Grant intended to have the clinic records changed by the embryologist. The documentation would be updated to reflect the failure of our second IVF cycle. In this manner, it would seem as though we had conceived organically. The trap was phase 4. Grant intended to recommend a DNA test following the birth. He would present it as something lovely and heartfelt, a celebration of our family and evidence of paternity to display in the nursery. Phase 5 was the final shot. He would have all the proof he needed when the DNA test revealed he wasn't the biological father, and the medical records indicated we had conceived naturally. He had been cheated on by his wife. He didn't own the baby. The victim was him. There was an infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement. In wealthy families, this is typical. Safeguards the assets. If one spouse cheats, the other spouse will be penalized $500,000. Additionally, any claim to the other's property is forfeited by the adulterous spouse. The injured spouse may also file a lawsuit to recover further emotional damages. Grant had a very clear aim in mind. At the very least, he would take home $500,000. He would ruin my reputation. In a lawsuit, he would most likely receive more. And I couldn't have adequately retaliated because I would have been so distraught, perplexed, and desperate to keep my child safe. He was relying on my humiliation to get me to comply. He nearly got away with it. Dr. Brennan took other papers out of the folder. Everything had been salvaged by Molly. Original sample documents that included the donor's ID number, the switch, and payment records that could be linked to Grant-controlled accounts. Grant and the embryologist even exchanged emails. Using personal email addresses and ambiguous phrasing, they believed they were being cunning. However, there was more than enough. Molly had located the donor as well. Derek Sykes was his name. A 28-year-old graduate student received $15,000 in cash. A typical sperm donor could pay $100 or $200. $15,000 should have raised serious concerns, but student loans are not self-paying. Derek was informed that it was a private agreement for a couple seeking additional secrecy. He was unaware that he was involved in a scam. He was enraged and eager to help when he learned. Claire responded cautiously. There was one more thing. Something she had discovered via her own studies. Grant Mercer owed $180,000 due to gaming. He has years of gambling experience. He had persuaded me that internet poker, sports betting, and excursions to casinos were business conferences, all the while feigning to be a responsible financial advisor with a flawless life. Additionally, he had embezzled the $50,000 he had spent to corrupt my IVF, and falsely accused me of infidelity from his own clients in little increments over time, cleverly concealed in the accounts. His company was still unaware. Grant wasn't merely attempting to embezzle my fortune. He was clinging to anything he could get his hands on like a drowning man. He was being crushed by his gaming debts. The bankers to whom he owed money lacked patience. When you don't pay, they are the ones who don't bring legal action. I was meant to be his lifeblood. He was prepared to ruin me entirely in order to obtain my grandmother's money, which was meant to save him. That I spent a lot of time sitting in that office. The truth burned a hole in my chest as the documents laid out before me. First came shock, cold, paralyzing shock, followed by unbelief. I repeatedly examined the paperwork in an attempt to find a mistake or misunderstanding that would allow everything to get back to normal. The parts then began to fit together. When we were dating, he was obsessed with getting access to my money, made covert phone calls, stayed up late, and paid close attention. Before we even met, he had done some research on me. It wasn't at all an accident that we ran into each other at the charity gala. Before he ever said hi, he understood exactly who I was and what I was worth. I believe that the tears he shed during our wedding were caused by happiness. They were relieved tears. At last, his long-running scam was paying off. And my mother Vivian, whom I had shunned for 2 years because I thought she was overly protective, jealous, and paranoid. In 5 minutes she had seen right through him. He doesn't smile all the way to his eyes. She attempted to caution me. I went with him instead of her. I considered crying. I considered yelling. I considered driving home, confronting him, hurling those documents in his face, and watching as he frantically tried to explain. But then something else took place. My tummy began to feel chilly. Something calm, concentrated, and acute. He believed I was foolish. He had planned this whole thing with the expectation that I would fail. I would be so saddened by the evidence of my adultery when his trap materialized that I would give him anything he asked for in order to put an end to it. I was weak in his opinion. I was naive in his opinion. He considered me to be a simple target. He didn't know who he had wed. I turned to face Dr. Brennan. He is unaware that I am aware. No one else has been informed by my sister. And it wasn't until I saw your file today that I linked you to the case. Excellent. I meticulously collected the documentation. I require copies of every document. I also need you to put me in touch with Molly personally. What will you do? I got to my feet. The infant, who was totally innocent in all of this, had my hand resting on my abdomen. A child whose biology was not their choice. Regardless of DNA testing, donor IDs, or any of the negativity surrounding their presence, I already loved this child. I said, my husband believes he's been playing chess. He believes he has 3 moves ahead of him. He believes he has already prevailed. I raised my shoulders. I've already flipped the board, and he will soon find out. After that appointment, I drove home with my hands solid on the wheel, my expression carefully neutral, and my breathing even just in case. 2 years ago, Grant set up security cameras throughout our home. He claimed it was for protection at the time. I now question whether it was surveillance, whether he was watching the video, and whether he was observing my actions and facial expressions to see if I had any suspicions. I therefore gave him nothing. When I arrived home, he was waiting for me, standing in the kitchen with his half-smile. I kept thinking about what my mother had said. It's too late by 2 years. How did the meeting go? He inquired. Is the infant doing well? I returned his smile, went to give him a hug, and showed him the ultrasound picture that Dr. Brennan had printed prior to things changing. Perfect, I replied. Everything is flawless. For that performance, I should win an Oscar. Over dinner, I gave him a smile while figuring out how much his bail would be. Imagining him in an orange jumpsuit, I inquired about his day. His quip regarding baby names even made me giggle. I dedicated myself to the part as if my life depended on it, even though it wasn't funny at all. I expressed regret for my recent paranoia. He used the same justification that he had been using against me for months, blaming the hormones. When he heard that, his entire body calmed. His shoulders became less tense. He believed he was still winning. He believed his plan was still on course. He slept soundly next to me that night. I stayed up until 3 in the morning, planning his demise while gazing at the ceiling. I called in sick to work the following morning. After that, I spent 2 hours driving to a different city, while continuously checking my mirrors to make sure I wasn't being followed. Maybe I was paranoid, but I deserved it. I discovered Rosalind Weaver, a former police detective who worked for 15 years before becoming private. Sharp eyes and a nonchalant demeanor, She was the type of woman who had seen everything and was unimpressed. I told her everything. She took notes, listened without interjecting, and grinned like a shark spotting a swimmer who was bleeding when I was done. Your husband made a lot of mistakes, she stated. Men who are arrogant always do. Give me 2 weeks. In 10 days she received results. Grant owed $180,000 for his gaming. He owed money to a few private lenders who undoubtedly failed to submit documentation to the IRS, as well as to underground poker games and internet gambling sites. The type of creditors who become extremely inventive when payments are not made on time. The embezzlement was verified. Over the course of 18 months, over $53,000 was embezzled from client accounts at his firm through little transactions meant to evade detection. His superiors were still unaware. The affair came next. 8 months, hotel rooms, romantic dinners, his assistant, and weekend trips disguised as business travel. Rosalind's pitiful collection included credit card receipts, texts, and pictures. His helper. It was his assistant, of course. How utterly uninspired. The cliché nearly offended me. At least be creative if you're going to ruin your marriage. The cheating husband handbook literally starts with having an affair with your assistant. Grant would have underlined that page if there was such a handbook. Rosalind also discovered something else. Grant has tried to find a wealthy woman before. He dated Caroline Ashford in Boston 5 years ago. The complete package: family funds, trust funds, etc. Before she found financial problems in a joint account he had persuaded her to open. They had been dating for 8 months. She left the relationship right away, but she was too ashamed to file a complaint. Rosalind found her. Caroline was more than happy to make a statement at this point. She had always felt bad about letting him get away with it. Molly Brennan and I had a covert meeting in a coffee shop an hour away from town where neither of us would be recognized. She had a horrible appearance. Dark rings beneath her eyes, thin and pallid. She had been consumed by the guilt. As soon as she saw me take a seat, she began to weep. She kept saying, "I'm so sorry. I was aware that it was incorrect." I stopped her because I only wanted the money. He was so compelling, and I wondered if he was genuinely attempting to shield you from a hereditary problem. One thing I must know. Would you be willing to give an official recorded testimony? Without hesitation she nodded. I'll tell them everything. The day after it occurred, I ought to have called the police. I was simply terrified of losing everything: my job, my license. I will, however, testify under oath about anything you require. I stared at her for a long time. My spouse had attempted to destroy me with the aid of this woman. She had stolen $30,000 in order to commit fraud. She was complicit in any way. However, Grant had deceived her in the same manner that he had deceived me. He had discovered and taken advantage of her weakness. The architect was him. She was merely an instrument. Don't be afraid anymore. You're not the antagonist in this tale, I informed her. He is. The embryologist suddenly and conveniently got a conscience after discovering that Molly was participating and had kept documents. He told Rosalind what he had to say. He was afraid of going to jail and losing his medical license. He would say whatever was required to lock Grant up. Making a call to my mother was the hardest thing I did. Near stillness for 2 years. Grant was chosen over her for 2 years. When she questioned his intentions, I had stood up for him. I no longer extended Christmas invitations to her. She had been correct about everything, and I had branded her envious, suspicious, and incapable of accepting that I was content. Before she answered, the phone rang twice. Daphne. She sounded eager and cautious, as if she had been waiting for this call for 2 years and didn't want to ruin it. Mom. On the word my voice broke. You were correct about every aspect of him, and I really apologize. I sincerely apologize. Pause occurred. I prepared myself for the "I told you so" that she had deserved. For the sorrow, anger, and contempt I'd caused by choosing a con artist over my mother. What do you need, sweetheart? She replied instead. She refrained from gloating. She didn't remind me of all the cautions I had disregarded. She had been trying to tell me for years, but she didn't mention it. She simply inquired as to how she might assist. More than anything else, that broke me. Before taking a break, my mother, a retired lawyer, spent 30 years specializing in estate law. She put me in touch with Connecticut's top divorce attorney, and a fraud-focused criminal prosecutor in less than a day. That day, I learned something from my mother. It's not necessary for those who truly love you to be correct. All they want is for you to be all right. For 2 years, I had chosen a con artist over my mother. When I called out in tears, her initial reaction was still to defend me. That's the appearance of true love. Grant had never experienced that, thus he never comprehended it. Sandra Kowalski, a 5 feet 2 inches woman with silver hair who always had reading glasses on her nose, was my attorney. She had the appearance of a loving granny. In a cardigan she was a shark. Sandra went over everything. The findings, Molly's statement, the clinic records, the evidence of the affair, and the embezzlement records. When she was done, she grinned as she peered up at me through those reading spectacles. Your husband is accused of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Because he is the one who has been unfaithful in his little plan to fabricate medical records after the delivery, the prenuptial adultery provision now works in your favor. He intended to commit that crime. We have proof of purpose. She worked in tandem with the prosecutor. Molly provided police with an official sworn statement. In return for lower fees, the embryologist collaborated. The lost money was discreetly reported to Grant's company. They promptly blocked his access to customer accounts and started their own inquiry. After considering the evidence, a judge issued an arrest warrant for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy after finding probable cause. At this point, my attorney referred to it as a formality. I referred to it as the greatest piece of paper I had ever laid eyes on. 8.5 by 11 inches of karma. I proposed to Grant that we host a baby moon party at my grandmother's estate 6 weeks following that ultrasound appointment. A garden party in the afternoon to honor the impending baby, attended by both families and close friends. His eyes were as bright as a Christmas morning. His dedicated husband's performance has more witnesses. When his wife was revealed to be unfaithful, more people would sympathize with him. Additional gasoline for the sympathy he intended to exploit. That's a wonderful idea, he murmured, giving me the soft kiss on the forehead that used to reassure me. Let me help plan everything. No, I said, giving him a chest thump. You've been putting in a lot of effort recently, even staying up late at work. I'll take care of the celebration. Simply show up and have fun. He was unaware that my approach to managing everything included police officers waiting in the guest house, my attorney position next to the bar, Derek Sykes prepared to testify, all of the evidence arranged in files, and his own parents on the verge of discovering the true identity of their son. Saturday was the planned date of the celebration. That morning, Grant rehearsed his excited father smile, adjusted his tie, and practiced facial expressions in the restroom. Through the gap in the door, I observed him. I'd slept with this man for 3 years. I had put my future, my family, and my heart in the hands of this man. He believed he was about to accomplish his greatest feat. He didn't realize he was entering his own funeral. Late April at the Wilson family estate. The gardens of my granny in full bloom. 50 years of meticulous cultivation that is vibrant. On the back lawn are white tents. Silver buckets of chilled champagne. Every table is decorated with flowers. A quartet of strings is softly playing next to the rose bushes. 50 people were out and about in their Sunday attire. Friends, family, and co-workers. Grant's parents had traveled from Maryland by car. Extremely pleased of their prosperous son and his lovely expectant spouse, this party would have been a hit with my grandmother. Additionally, she would have seen right through Grant in less than 30 seconds. But for you, that's grandmother wisdom. The rest of us have to learn to spot phonies the hard way, but the elder generation has a radar for them. Working the crowd like a politician at a fundraiser, Grant was in his element. Backslaps, handshakes, and the endearing laugh he had honed over years of practice. He kept reaching towards my stomach to take pictures. He was the loving father-to-be, staring at me with what appeared to be devotion every time someone aimed a camera. He was very skilled at acting like a human. I nearly felt sorry for him. Nearly. It took me about 3 seconds to realize that he had spent $50,000 attempting to ruin my life. After that, sympathy faded really quickly. Grant's mother continued to wipe her eyes with a handkerchief. She said, I always knew he'd make a wonderful father, to anyone who would listen. Such a good boy, such a caring husband. His father was proud of the family Grant was purportedly creating, and he walked around with quivering hands and a swelled chest. The Mercer name persisted, carrying on the legacy. Standing close to the dessert table, my mother watched Grant with a cat-like face, like a mouse that is unaware that it is trapped. Across the grass, she glanced at me and lifted her champagne glass a little. It's almost time. Grant did precisely what I expected him to do at 3 o'clock. For weeks, he had been hinting that he wanted a DNA test to commemorate becoming a father. Present the outcomes in the nursery as evidence of their relationship, which is incredibly romantic, significant, and meticulously prepared. He played it loudly once more at the gathering so that many people could hear it. "Honey, do you know what we ought to do?" Playing to the crowd, he drew me in and put his arm around my waist. "I've been reflecting. Let's purchase a DNA test kit. The outcomes can be framed for the nursery. Evidence of the enduring bond between father and child. That would be unique, wouldn't it?" Awe was expressed by a number of the guests. Once more, his mother wiped her eyes. I feigned hesitation. "Oh, I'm not sure. That sounds like a lot of work." "Come on, it will be fantastic. The results could potentially be opened at this very moment. Include it in the festivities. Everyone, what are your thoughts?" Encouraging murmurs from the audience. "How sweet," someone remarked. Another person said they hoped their spouse was so considerate. I pretended to be the timid wife and looked about. Grant was virtually radiant. "If everyone agrees that it's a fantastic idea." It was his time. He had been building the trap for more than a year, and it was about to slam shut. He was already able to taste my wealth, my humiliation, and my demise. Simply put, he was unaware of whose neck was in danger. Please hit the like button if this story has you gripped. I really enjoy reading your opinions in the comments. Let's finally do what you've been waiting for. Rather than taking out a DNA kit, I made my way to the little platform we had put up for speeches and toasts next to the fountain. I grabbed the microphone. With champagne in hand, Grant grinned up at me from the crowd. He was already practicing his shocked, heartbroken expression and the tears he would shed if his wife's infidelity was revealed. I said, "Thank you all for coming today," as my voice echoed over the grass. "The purpose of this festival is to honor truth, family, and celebration." In the throng I saw Grant's gaze. "I'm going to assist my husband in revealing something special that he mentioned he wanted to accomplish today." For the first time in his performance, his smile wavered for a brief moment. I took out a folder from beneath the podium. "I discovered something about my hubby 3 months ago that completely altered my preconceived notions about our marriage. Grant is correct, and I want to share it with you all today. This ought to be about the truth." Grant's smile had frozen. Halfway to his lips, his champagne glass had stopped. Grant and I had trouble becoming pregnant. His diagnosis indicated that we couldn't conceive naturally. We therefore underwent IVF at a facility he selected. I raised the initial document. "These are the clinic's records. The original documents before they may be changed." That word lingered in the air. Original. Grant's face turned white. "According to these documents, my spouse bought off 2 clinic staff members to replace his sperm sample with donor sperm. He gave a nurse $30,000. In addition to paying the embryologist, he gave a young guy called Derek Sykes $15,000. I pointed to the crowd's edge. Derek, a 28-year-old graduate student, came forward, believing he was assisting an infertile couple rather than engaging in fraud. To give the sperm that was used to conceive my child without my knowledge or permission. The crowd erupted in gasps. Grant's mum took hold of his dad's arm. A champagne glass was dropped, and it broke on the stones of the patio. I went on. "My husband's plan was simple. Await the birth of our child. Demand a DNA test and accuse me of having an affair when the findings showed he wasn't the biological father, as he already knew would happen. I raised additional papers. There is an infidelity clause in our prenuptial agreement. I would owe him $500,000 if I had allegedly cheated. He might file a lawsuit for more damages. He has the power to ruin my reputation. He may walk away with everything my grandmother left me." Grant discovered his voice. Desperate, it came out choked. "This is crazy, Daphne, honey. You don't understand. Hormones and pregnancy are to blame. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm not done yet. I spoke in a cold tone. The audience fell silent. To finance this ruse, my husband embezzled about $50,000 from his clients at his firm in addition to bribing the fertility clinic. I turned to see Grant's boss, who had been discreetly invited, standing close to the bar. His company is now aware of this and is looking into it. Grant's supervisor put down his drink. His expression conveyed all. In addition, my spouse owes $180,000 for gambling. He owes money to folks who don't tolerate late payments. And I took out the pictures from the previous 8 months. Just romantic enough to be unmistakable, without being overt. He and his assistant have been having an affair. Grant's mom sounded as if she had been struck in the stomach. I put the pictures on display. Dinners at restaurants, hotel entrances, the kind of proof that eliminates any chance of rejection. I emphasized that this wasn't even his first try. He targeted another woman with family money in Boston 5 years ago. When she found financial problems, that partnership came to an end. She is ready to testify and has given investigators a statement. Grant let go of his champagne glass. It burst as it struck the stone patio. His pricey shoes were splattered with champagne. He muttered, "Those are lies. This is something she made up. She has mental instability. Grant, her mental state has been impacted by the pregnancy." The sound was broken by the gentle yet piercing voice of his own mother. "Is any of this accurate?" He opened his mouth to refute everything as he turned to face her. Nothing emerged. Pale but resolute, Molly Brennan moved forward from where she had been standing next to the guest house. She said, "I'm the nurse he bought off. I have all of the documentation. The cops have already received my statement." Next to speak was Derek Sykes. He assured me it was a private deal and gave me $15,000. Until Mrs. Wilson's investigator contacted me last month, I was unaware that I was involved in a deception. Grant scanned the features of those who had been laughing with him 10 minutes before. His family, his coworkers, and the society pals he had put a lot of effort into impressing. He was being stared at by everyone as if he were some rotten item they had just found on their shoe. Then 2 police officers emerged from the guest house and crossed the grass in a composed manner. Mercer, Grant. The first officer spoke in a neutral, professional tone. "You are being held for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. You are entitled to keep quiet. In a court of law, whatever you say could and will be used against you." He was handcuffed in front of everyone. Now his mother was crying. His father stared at the ground as if he wanted it to open up and engulf him, refusing to look at him. Grant made one last attempt at deception as they led him to the police car. "Please, Daphne." His voice broke. "We can resolve this. Despite my mistakes, I still adore you. I've loved you forever. Avoid doing this. Consider our child. Consider our family." I gave him a look. I took a close look at the man I had lived with for 3 years. The man I stood up for to my mother. The man who, while calculating how much he could steal, stood at an altar and vowed to love and protect me. "You're absolutely right, Grant," I replied. "We simply figured it out." He was placed in the rear of the police vehicle. I watched it drive off through the iron gates of the property Grant had long yearned to possess, past the gardens my grandmother had planted 50 years ago, and down the long gravel driveway. There was complete quiet among the 50 visitors. My mother then approached me and wrapped her arm around my shoulders. She whispered, "I'm proud of you. And so would your granny." And I breathed deeply for the first time in months. Grant was not granted bail. The judge stated that there was a flight risk. There was too much risk that he might vanish due to his gambling obligations and the persons he owed money to. As soon as the arrest became public, those gambling creditors became very interested. While Grant was married to a wealthy woman, they had been patient. When they realized the money train had derailed, that patience vanished. The morning following the celebration, his helper, with whom he had been having an affair for 8 months, quit his job, sent an email, disappeared, and didn't even tidy her desk. She bolted without waiting for the handcuffs to snap close. I have witnessed rats depart sinking ships with greater loyalty. Rats at least have the grace to turn around once. In just 2 weeks, Grant's company finished its internal inquiry. $53,000 has been verified as missing. They brought criminal charges on their own. After learning of the arrest, the Boston woman, Caroline Ashford, stepped forward in public. She felt foolish for falling for his charade for 5 years. Too ashamed to seek justice. She no longer felt ashamed. Her remarks strengthened the prosecution's case. In record speed, the divorce was finalized. There was nothing to negotiate with, despite Grant's attorney's best efforts. The infidelity clause in the prenuptial agreement, which Grant had intended to use against me, worked in my favor. He was now the one who had cheated on her for 8 months. I owed him, not the other way around. He didn't have anything to offer. All the things he said he had were either fictitious, stolen, or borrowed. The criminal case proceeded swiftly. Molly Brennan gave a statement. In return for a lighter sentence, the embryologist fully collaborated. The statement came from Derek Sykes. Grant believed he had concealed the paper trail, but it wasn't. Embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Every charge became jammed. Years were attached to each charge. After the first week, his parents stopped attending court. In a statement, his father said that Grant had made decisions that no parent could support. His mother checked herself into a facility for exhaustion, a term used by affluent people to describe their inability to deal with reality. The man who had entered my life 4 years prior, Grant Mercer, would be incarcerated for a number of years. He would have nothing when he finally escaped. No career, no money, no family who would accept him, and no potential targets who wouldn't discover his criminal history by just searching for his name. I have all of the documentation. The cops have already received my statement. Next to speak was Derek Sykes. He assured me it was a private deal and gave me $15,000. Until Mrs. Wilson's investigator contacted me last month, I was unaware that I was involved in a deception. Grant scanned the features of those who had been laughing with him 10 minutes before. His family, his coworkers, and the society pals he had put a lot of effort into impressing. He was being stared at by everyone as if he were some rotten item they had just found on their shoe. Then 2 police officers emerged from the guest house and crossed the grass in a composed manner. Mercer, Grant. The first officer spoke in a neutral, professional tone. You are being held for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. You are entitled to keep quiet. In a court of law, whatever you say could and will be used against you. He was handcuffed in front of everyone. Now his mother was crying. His father stared at the ground as if he wanted it to open up and engulf him, refusing to look at him. Grant made one last attempt at deception as they led him to the police car. Please, Daphne. His voice broke. We can resolve this. Despite my mistakes, I still adore you. I've loved you forever. Avoid doing this. Consider our child. Consider our family. I gave him a look. I took a close look at the man I had lived with for 3 years. The man I stood up for to my mother. The man who, while calculating how much he could steal, stood at an altar and vowed to love and protect me. You're absolutely right, Grant, I replied. We simply figured it out. He was placed in the rear of the police vehicle. I watched it drive off through the iron gates of the property Grant had long yearned to possess, past the gardens my grandmother had planted 50 years ago, and down the long gravel driveway. There was complete quiet among the 50 visitors. My mother then approached me and wrapped her arm around my shoulders. She whispered, I'm proud of you. And so would your granny. And I breathed deeply for the first time in months. Grant was not granted bail. The judge stated that there was a flight risk. There was too much risk that he might vanish due to his gambling obligations and the persons he owed money to. As soon as the arrest became public, those gambling creditors became very interested. While Grant was married to a wealthy woman, they had been patient. When they realized the money train had derailed, that patience vanished. The morning following the celebration, his helper, with whom he had been having an affair for 8 months, quit his job, sent an email, disappeared, and didn't even tidy her desk. She bolted without waiting for the handcuffs to snap close. I have witnessed rats depart sinking ships with greater loyalty. Rats at least have the grace to turn around once. In just 2 weeks, Grant's company finished its internal inquiry. $53,000 has been verified as missing. They brought criminal charges on their own. After learning of the arrest, the Boston woman, Caroline Ashford, stepped forward in public. She felt foolish for falling for his charade for 5 years. Too ashamed to seek justice. She no longer felt ashamed. Her remarks strengthened the prosecution's case. In record speed, the divorce was finalized. There was nothing to negotiate with, despite Grant's attorney's best efforts. The infidelity clause in the prenuptial agreement, which Grant had intended to use against me, worked in my favor. He was now the one who had cheated on her for 8 months. I owed him, not the other way around. He didn't have anything to offer. All the things he said he had were either fictitious, stolen, or borrowed. The criminal case proceeded swiftly. Molly Brennan gave a statement. In return for a lighter sentence, the embryologist fully collaborated. The statement came from Derek Sykes. Grant believed he had concealed the paper trail, but it wasn't. Embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Every charge became jammed. Years were attached to each charge. After the first week, his parents stopped attending court. In a statement, his father said that Grant had made decisions that no parent could support. His mother checked herself into a facility for exhaustion, a term used by affluent people to describe their inability to deal with reality. The man who had entered my life 4 years prior, Grant Mercer, would be incarcerated for a number of years. He would have nothing when he finally escaped. No career, no money, no family who would accept him, and no potential targets who wouldn't discover his criminal history by just searching for his name.